Over 2,000 years ago, two disillusioned disciples walked along a dusty road to Emmaus. They had just witnessed Jesus, their friend and leader, whom they hoped to be the Messiah, suffer a gruesome death by crucifixion. Doubt, fear, and uncertainty clouded their conversation as they journeyed home, questioning the future. Until something miraculous happened. The risen Jesus appeared and answered their questions. Today, many young Catholics step onto college campuses with numerous questions about their faith, yearning to know if the seed of faith given to them as a child is both true and practical. Using the miracle on the road to Emmaus as a model, young adult ministers conversed weekly for 3 months with college students about the most pressing questions they had about the Catholic faith. As they journeyed together virtually, something amazing happened. Doubts disappeared, fears faded, and Jesus revealed that He is still alive. Hearts Burning Within Us, the latest book from Patchwork Heart Ministry, scheduled to be released in the summer of 2021, is a result of that grace-infused conversation. To pre-order your copy and help spread the word about the book, visit patchworkheart.org. Welcome to the Sowing Hope podcast. This is a show all about implanting hope in our hearts. I'm Bill Snyder, joined by my friend Ann DeSantis. We're glad you're here for our uplifting conversation about faith and how it sustains our hearts through all the seasons of life. Thanks for walking with us. And good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Sowing Hope podcast. I am Bill Snyder. It is wonderful to be with you this evening, no matter where you're listening from. Thank you so very much for being here and being a part of our ministry to simply sow hope into broken hearts. As always, I'm joined by my friend and co-host Ann DeSantis, and it is a rainy day here in Wisconsin. But Ann, how is it in Philadelphia? How are you doing this evening?
I'm doing great, and actually, it's a beautiful day here. You might be jealous, Bill.
Yeah, yeah, but you know what they say about Wisconsin? The weather in Philadelphia was Wisconsin today, so you might get getting some rain tomorrow. Anyway, I know we have a wonderful show in store for people and a great guest, so why don't you tell us a little bit about her?
Yes, we have an amazing guest this evening. We have Julianne M. Bartlett. And Julianne is coming to us from Pennsylvania, same state as me, but not quite in the Philadelphia area. And she was also a part of a conference that I was involved with last month called the Catholic Dating Conference with Smart Catholics. And I know we can talk a little bit about that too. But before we do that, I thought we could read her bio. Julianne has a wonderful bio. Julianne was married to her husband, Seth. She is married to her husband, Seth, at the age of 42, having struggled with prolonged singleness for most of her adult life. She knows firsthand the aloneness and the trials that one can encounter on the path to marriage, especially when the unmarried person is older. Without a doubt, Julianne believes that God loves marriage. Her favorite subject to write and speak about is the call to marry, and especially to give hope to singles who desire marriage. After spending many years in non denominational churches, Julianne returned to the Catholic Church in her mid 30s, where she fell in love with the fullness of truth. Some years later, she wed her husband and realized her experiences could help others. Offering hope backed up with reason, Julianne provides a faithful analysis of the scriptures, catechism of the Catholic Church, and other church writings to support her insistence that single people can get to marriage with God's help. Julianne and her husband, Seth, live in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and she can be found at passionofhope.com. Julianne, welcome to Sowing Hope.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you for having me. Hi, Bill. Nice to meet you as well. It's an honor to be here.
Yeah, no, it's wonderful to have you, and we're going to have a great conversation. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. We have so much to talk about. Now, this show is called Sowing Hope, and many times at the very beginning of the show, we talk about the stories of the people that come on the show. So we would love to start out with your own personal journey in faith.
Sure. Well, I was actually born and raised in the Catholic Church, and I actually left the Catholic Church when I was about 17 years old. And it's kind of interesting in the sense that I grew up in a church. I like to say it was a very, not a very active Catholic church. And I had gone through 8 years of catechism. And then I went to 4 years of Catholic high school. I was in public grammar school and then Catholic high school. And I had 4 years of great high school experience, but I never learned anything about the Catholic faith. And so then I went to college and law school. And during my college and law school years, I did not go to church at all. And then when I came back from law school, I was really hungry to know the truth about God. But I didn't think it was found in the Catholic Church because I didn't learn anything during all that years of, catechism and CCD, and then in high school. So I ventured into the evangelical non-denominational world, and I spent 10 years there. And that really began my search on this. Like, I learned a lot about the scriptures, and so but I also was growing older and unmarried. And God used this struggle with marriage to actually drive me back to the Catholic Church. So it was very interesting in that the reason I left the Catholic Church, which was to find the truth about God, was what actually drove me back to the Catholic Church, in the sense that I knew there had to be like one thing that God believed about, because in my struggles in the evangelical church, I saw that some churches said God believed this, some churches said God believed that, and being a very logical person, I'm not always, sometimes, but I try to be, is that I knew God could only believe one thing, especially on this singleness issue. And it drove me back to the Catholic Church. And so in my research on the singleness issue, I started looking at the writings of saints and what the Catholic Church had to say, because I was very desperate. I was very desperate to find the truth about what God had to say about singleness and marriage. And in that search about singleness, and delving into the Catholic writings, I started to see the truth about the Catholic Church and the magisterium and the Jerusalem Council and the early church. And then I started to learn about the actual truth. I learned all these things that I never learned as a child. And I as soon as I realized the fullness of truth that was contained in the Catholic Church, I actually contacted a priest And I immediately got myself back into the church, which was great because I had had all my sacraments as a child. So,
Wow, what a story. I mean,
yeah,
you've told it to me before because you were a guest on the foundation that I represent, the St. Raymond and Nonna's Foundation. And that has yet to be published, but it will be coming out pretty soon, that video podcast that we did.
right.
And so you have had quite a journey. And then, you met your husband. So God answered that prayer. I mean, you weren't in your 20s or your 30s, right? I mean, you were in your 40s.
Yes, my early 40s.
Yes. So tell us about that, because that's very interesting how you came back into the church and then you kept praying about, you felt that God did have a mate for you, that he did have someone in mind for you to live your life with. So what happened after that?
So I came back into the Catholic Church, and I had a lot of baggage. And it started in the evangelical world in the sense that, when you're older, you know, and I believe that everybody has a gift, and everybody has a struggle. And my struggle was getting to marriage. And so marriage comes easy for some people, and it didn't for me. And people would, and I honestly believe people don't know what to do with people who it doesn't come easy for. And and people, I see it happening in the Catholic Church too, because it did happen to me when I came back into the Catholic Church, that it started out in the evangelical church. People would, say to me, like, well, maybe God has nobody for you and you need to accept that, or God's called you to be single. And that would just absolutely break my heart. Like, I would just go into a tailspin of despair when that would be said to me. And when that initially happened, I didn't know theologically enough about God and how much he loves marriage to be able to counter that. So it was I would go into just like total despair over that. And I would really struggle with that, and I would believe that. And then as I did a lot of this research and everything, and then came back into the Catholic Church, I started to encounter that from a lot of people in the Catholic Church as well. And I see, I have people saying that to me in the Catholic Church as well. And I now see, now that I'm married, I see this new, I like to call it an error, and not in the magisterium, because we know that that's error free, but it being said to people like, oh, well, you might be called to a vocation of singleness. And I don't believe that that is true, that there's not a vocation to singleness apart from forsaking the great good of marriage for the kingdom of heaven. And you're not just called to be single to be single. And I actually never could accept it. Like, I just knew that I was called to marriage. Like, I knew I was not called to a religious life. Like, I had thought about that, but I just knew that I wasn't. I had this burning desire to be married. And so I prayed novenas. I did, I prayed to like all these saints. Like, I would actually pray to Sarah in the book of Tobit, who struggled to get a husband. I would pray to her. I prayed to Hannah and to Abraham's wife, Sarah, and Elizabeth, because those were women who struggled to have babies later in life. So I knew they could relate to my struggle. And eventually I prayed, to the Blessed Mother, because to me, she's like the saint above all saints. So I knew that she could do something for me. And it was really that those prayers, I believe, to the Blessed Mother that really came through for me. And I met my husband like right after Divine Mercy Sunday. And we were, we met, and my husband was married previously, and I had shared that with you when we did the the video podcast for your foundation, that my husband was married previously, and so we needed to get an annulment, and I wouldn't even um, contemplate getting engaged without an annulment, because I take the marriage laws very seriously that the church has in place. And so we met, we dated, we had an annulment, we got engaged, and we got married all within 11 months to the date that we had met. So it's really, truly a miracle that God had performed for me.
Mm. Yeah, that's a beautiful story, and I really am impressed by, number one, your faithfulness to the church, and how beautiful that is, and also I'm intrigued because I think we hear an awful lot about singleness is a vocation, and you give a great point in that forsaking marriage for the building up of the kingdom of God, and certainly priests, religious, and there's even perpetual virgins who make a vow to sacrifice this great gift of marriage for the kingdom of heaven, so that they can remain free from marriage, so that they can serve everybody in the church. But when it comes to marriage, you're right. God loves marriage. In fact, in like one of the very first things God says to man is that it's not good for man to be alone, and of course He creates woman so that they can be together and have this loving bond and relationship. So I would love for you just to maybe expound on that and talk a little bit more about how you discovered that singleness, just being perpetually single to be single and not have any direction, whether an interior prayer life about, okay, does God want me to forsake this great gift of marriage for the kingdom, or does He want me to get married? And so maybe you can talk to us a little bit about the discernment process of how you went through that, or how you would like other people to maybe approach that too. I think you have some really great insights, especially getting married a little bit later in life. So that would be wonderful.
Sure. Well, I think that, like, for the first time in history, we're facing like a societal phenomenon that's going on where, it's not just inside the church, it's society. And then the church is being impacted by what's going on in society, in that we have people delaying marriage, for much longer. And so, like, there's some scriptures that talk about, like, that it's there's like at least three of them that talk about like the wife of your youth, or this, and the spouse of your youth. And I think God created us to marry at a much younger age than what we're seeing going on. And I think our biological nature speaks to that. Like, and because I think we have, one, birth control has become so accepted, and then we have a sex drive, and it's meant to drive us to marriage, and that God has ordained the sacrament of marriage as the only acceptable relationship for the marital embrace. Society has deemed that to be like, you can have sex whenever and with whoever, and there's no shame anymore in having sex outside of marriage. So you can keep delaying marriage as long as you want, and not responding to what your body is saying. And then people have deemed marriage not necessary. So they'll have, living together, having children outside of marriage, and not deeming the marriage union necessary for children. And I kind of fell into that in the sense of that, I went to college, I went to law school, and that those things were good in the sense that I have skills, and I think people, women should still do that. But then there's this thing that happens after you get your education, that it's like, well, we can't get married now because we still have to become financially capable of getting married. And I think that becomes more important to people than getting married. And that's not good either. And then it becomes harder and harder to get married. And I'm not really sure how to fix that, but I think at some point people have to recognize that getting married is more important than being financially secure, because the financial security comes when you're married. That will come with marriage. And we have to value marriage more than we value making a lot of money and becoming financially secure, because that God will honor us and take care of us if we honor his precepts and honor him by doing things his way. And so I think because we have this phenomenon going on, the church, and when I say the church, I mean like little c, not big C with the magisterium. People don't know what to do with all of these singles who then get stuck in what I have termed prolonged singleness, because it's prolonged. Like God created us in a primordial state of marriage. Like he could have created Adam and Eve any way that he wanted to, but he created them in this primordial state of marriage. And so that is how we're really supposed to be functioning, and how we mirror God's image completely to the world around us. And so that desire for marriage, if we're living in the right way, it never goes away. That desire, like I've had women who have read my website write me, and some of them are in their 50s and 60s who have never married, and they're like heartbroken because that desire for marriage has never gone away. And people would say to me, like, well, you have a law degree, you have a career, you don't need marriage. Like, they're two completely separate needs. Like when God created Adam, it says that he put him in the garden to work it and to keep it. And that work was like a completely separate need. Then God said, it's not good for man to be alone. And then he created Eve for him. So work and marriage are two separate needs. And they were before the fall. Like they were absolutely before Adam and Eve sinned. And then there was the need for the cross. So God created us with what I like to call pre-fall needs. He made us needy.
Yeah.
That's a great point. That's a great point. And I don't think we often think of that when we think of needs, okay, but Adam did have a need. I remember listening to another evangelist talking about, how Adam looked through all of the creatures God had created, and he couldn't find one like himself, right?
Right. And he said, when God brought Eve to him, he said, at last, this one is like bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. So I kind of, when I look at that scripture, he's like, at last, like, so he was like, wow, like at last, this one is, for me, like in a way he was kind of looking, I think, like, like he was meant to, be, he was looking for something to match him, and when I look at these, prior to sin, because they lived in this like innocence, God talks about these, when I go back to my pre-fall need theory, God says, he put the food there for them. So he made us needy with food, and he gave us work, and he gave us marriage. So I view marriage as a need, and I don't think that has ever gone away, and nothing can replace that in us. And I think when we don't have it, like when we look at priests, like when priests get married, we never say that a priest has forsaken the great good of singleness. We always think that they've forsaken the great good of marriage.
Right.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thanks for all that you said. I mean, I think your ministry is amazing. For our listeners and for clarification, I thought it would be a good idea if you could tell us at the heart of your ministry, what is now, I know that your goal is not your own goal, but it's God's goal. I know that you're not going according to just what you feel like doing, right? I mean, this is what you feel God has instilled on you. So if you could have any outcome to your ministry over many, many years of doing this, what exactly would that be? Is your main goal to educate people that, and I'm going to say this bluntly, that singleness is not a vocation? I mean, is that pretty much what your bottom line is, what you're trying to instill so that it's more known, so that people don't say that, they have a choice as to whether they want to get married or not, that it's either you're going to be religious, you're going to become a priest, a nun, or you're going to get married? Because really and truly, that whole singleness is not really a choice. It's not something that you decide, hey, I want to be single for the rest of my life. It's not a vocation, right? I mean, I just want to make it clear that that's what your goal is what. And then I do want to ask some questions about that.
Sure. I think there's, 3 purposes to my ministry. One is what you just said, is to counteract that error that has entered in to the church, that singleness in and of itself, outside of, in Matthew 19, Jesus actually speaks to the 3 acceptable forms of singleness. He says that, there's 3 reasons a person doesn't marry. They're either born not capable of marriage, they're born because other people make them unable to marry, or they forsake marriage for the kingdom of heaven. So, and there's a whole discussion we can have about those 3.
Yeah.
So
I know. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, and maybe those might be some questions you have.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
I want people to know that they're not singled out. Like, if they really want marriage. So, and that kind of, tails off into my second thing. Like I was very fortunate in that I had 2 women that I have become friends with, that married later in life. They were about 10 years older than me, and I had found one through an article that she had written in ChristianityToday.com, which is a Protestant magazine, and I had become friends with her and another woman through her, and I considered them mentors, and they kind of gave me, encouragement and help, and so they were like the only resources out there, and so I want to provide for other, because I think the society has disintegrated even more than what it was for me in the 90s and the early 2000s. I want to help women, and even if men are out there that want to read my stuff, to help them, because we need to preserve the doctrine that's out there for people, and that if I can give what was given to me and a little bit more, then they have that. And the third reason too is that Sister Lucia of Fatima had said that the last battle between Satan and God was going to be over marriage and the family. And I believe part of that battle is the battle to get married. I believe that it is getting harder and harder for people to get married. And we're seeing that with this phenomenon of prolonged singleness. Like one of the statistics I've recently read is that at least 50% right now of people are single. And we even talked on the podcast, the video podcast we did for you, is that there's like a secondary prolonged singleness of people who have were married and got divorced. My husband himself had been single for over 10 years. And maybe even people who have, were married and maybe have become a widow or a widower. And so God didn't intend for us to live that way. And so I think by, part of that battle is because of the way the culture has become. And then I think if people can get married, one, it brings some happiness to them and they're not alone, which God didn't intend for them to be alone. And number two, it mirrors God's image to people on earth, because that's part of how, in Genesis, it says, let us make them in our image, male and female. And that's where we get the first clue that God is part of a Trinity. And we want to show God's image to everybody on earth.
Yeah, beautifully stated. And, I want to say one thing I really appreciate about you and your ministry is that you have thought this out so well. And I know you've done a lot of research and a lot of prayer and talked to a lot of people. So your conclusions are not just random. I know that what you've come up with here is based on church teaching, and it's based on the truth. I do have a question, though, because I know that there's somebody listening. I was even talking at the dinner table tonight with my husband and my daughter. My daughter's in her early 20s, and she does have her degree in theology. And even she didn't know, I will say this, okay? She got her bachelor's in theology. Even she didn't know that being single wasn't a vocation. Okay. And so my question is, if there's somebody listening and thinking, there are people out there. Now, I'm not saying I've been one of them. I was one of those people that when I was like a teenager, I wanted to get married, to a point where my husband was like, I'm going to get married when I'm 30. And so if he's listening, he's probably laughing along with me, but he did not have that desire as much as I did to get married right away. It was nothing against me. I mean, he was one of those guys that, enjoyed his friends and wasn't quite ready to settle down. So he kind of, instead of getting married at 30, got married at 26. But, and I was 24 and I'm 56 now. So we have been married for many, many years. But bottom line, what I want to say is that for those people who don't understand, there's people today that, quite honestly, now this is a flaw too. You're right, because there's not the desire, but there are people who literally say, well, I don't ever want to get married. And like I said, I mean, I love my husband. He's my husband. I mean, right. He's my life partner, but even he didn't want to get married right away. And we were celebrating our faith. I mean, he just didn't have that desire that I had, as much to get married right away. I mean, he was a young guy and he didn't feel he had the resources to settle down right away. So for those people out there that don't feel that sense of like that they feel this pull about wanting to get married, what do they do? What do those people do? Or are they still being called to marriage even if they don't feel it?
Yeah, and those are really good questions. I think there's a couple things mixed in there, and first of all, in today's day and age, things are so much more expensive, and I get it. Kids are getting, I say kids because I'm in my early 50s as well. So
right. I'm in my late now, but
and they get out with tremendous student loan debt. Tremendous. Like I know that their student loan debts from college are comparable to what mine were from law school. And I graduated in 1993, so from law school. So, but I also believe that, so when I married my husband 10 years ago, I was still paying on my law school loans, still. And so my husband, because I was married, I was able to pay more on them because two incomes are easier than one. And I think that's where marriage is, we need that sanctifying grace that marriage brings to us, that dying of self. And I think in our society today that we've become like, we don't want to die to self. We've become we have become like, I want to live for myself and I don't want to give to another. And so two incomes are going to allow you to be able to pay off debt. It's going to allow you to be able to get rid of that debt. And I also believe this too. And I say this for both men and women. When a man falls in love with a woman, he will do things that he never thought he would do. So, saying this when he's not saying this now, like my husband put his house up for sale in Texas before it sold, and moved out. I was living in Maryland, and it hadn't sold yet. And we trusted that it would sell, and he moved out to Maryland. Now I could never do something like that myself. And he married me with still a ton of law school loan debt. But that's like what Christ did. Christ took us on while we were still yet sinners. And that's what the marriage is supposed to be like, to take us on while we had a ton of debt. He bore all of our debt on the cross. And see, that's why we're becoming so more of a godless society. And that's why having more of these marriages are so more important, for people to see what God's relationship with us looks like. And then the other issue becomes, which, I'm just going to speak so bluntly because that's what I do, is the sex issue. The question becomes then, if people don't want to marry, are they being continent? Are they having sex outside of marriage? Are they disregarding God's, laws?
Yes.
And, we have this saying, which I'm sure that, everybody's heard of it. A lot of people say it's easier to ask for forgiveness than to ask for permission. Are people just, having sex and then just going to confession, or are they just having sex and not going to confession? Or are you like really taking it seriously that God only wants you to have sex inside of marriage and trying to live your life the way God ordains it to be lived? And those are some really serious questions that I think we as a church body should be having with people. And I don't know if we're really having them.
Well, that's why your ministry, and I'm glad we clarified the purpose of your ministry, because it sounds like to me, it's a combination of teaching, example, and also guiding. Now I could be wrong, but that's what I'm hearing, is that your ministry is so that there's an awareness of the truth, and the fact that if we look at ourselves as single-minded toward what God wants for our lives, then maybe truly there is not a single vocation. Now, I'm going to say that to you in the respect that even I myself was not completely fully aware that singleness isn't a vocation. I know that it's not a vocation of service, right? correct?
Yeah.
It's not a vocation of service. Now, the only other question, just to finish off that first part of the question that I asked, was that, so aside from the fact of someone who, like you said, are they living a chaste life? Are they really and truly living the doctrines of the church? Okay. If they're doing all that and they still say, you know what, I don't want to get married, I don't feel that marriage is my vocation. What about those people? So before we move on and talk about the rest of this discussion, I just want to clarify that, because there are people, and, you know, we have people who are, you know, quite bluntly same-sex attracted too. That,
And that's
you
a
know,
whole different topic.
that's a whole nother topic, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what I would say to you is, for anybody listening who says, you know what, I understand what she's saying, I love the church, I'm doing everything right, but I still don't have a desire in my heart to want to marry. What about those people? I guess.
So that could be like a consecrated virgin, you know, like, I don't have a desire to marry. I'm chaste, everything. I love Christ. You know, I might want to look at being a consecrated virgin. I don't feel like I feel called to a religious life. I feel called to stay in the world. That might be their road.
Yeah.
Okay.
And, you know, that's a beautiful insight too, because oftentimes we don't hear that on many podcasts or in the Catholic Church as an option. I mean, I know that is an option because I've witnessed it. I've seen that, and that's open for both men and women, by the way.
Yes.
That
Yes.
is not just a women's thing. It's open to both men and women, and there's actually a ceremony and
Yes.
vows that you take for that. Just like you would almost a wedding. It kind of looks
Yes.
like that.
Yes.
But for the exception that you were foregoing that for Christ, and that's a beautiful, beautiful vow to make. But I like that because there's also a level of commitment, right? There's and that issue, I think, is one that you can probably speak a little bit about, because I think we are, as human beings, meant for a commitment to a vocation of some kind, and it's not just leave it open to be single. No, if you're going to be a perpetual virgin, then make that statement. If you're going to be married, then make that statement, and make that witness to Christ, and you're making it to Christ and the church. You're not just making it to your spouse. I think that often gets watered down too, because of the way marriage is now turned into a social contract. You can go to the courthouse and get married, and you haven't, civilly married, and you haven't made that commitment to Christ and to God. And so maybe you want to just talk a little bit about that commitment to God as part of marriage.
Okay, sure. But as going into that, in the Catechism of the Catholic Church in section 1603, it states that God himself is the author of marriage, and that the vocation to marriage is written in the very nature of man and woman as they come from the hand of the Creator. And so when I read that, I realized that goes back to what happened in the garden, that God wrote marriage into the very nature of our creation, like when he created us, and that he created us in this primordial state of marriage. And then, we know what happened. Sin entered in, original sin, and nothing, I don't believe anything was exempt from the fallout of that. And so when Jesus in Matthew 19 talks about, the 3 reasons why somebody doesn't marry, there's certain people who are born not capable of marriage. And then there's people who are made not capable of marriage. And then there's the people who forsake it for the kingdom of heaven, which could be a consecrated single person, priestly life, the religious life. And I even put in there, maybe there might be a single person who doesn't take any of those, but maybe goes into some type of mission, who really feels like they can't, do it, or participates in an exorcism ministry and feels it's just too dangerous. I'm just kind of coming up with some examples.
Sure.
But the things that because it's written in our very nature, like we forsake that greater good when we do it for the kingdom. And I'm going to piggyback right around to your question, Bill. But I saw for myself, and this is where I want to give hope to people who are stuck in the prolonged singleness issue, is that I had become somebody who was not capable of marriage as a result of other people. But I was still called to it because I was called by God from it because it was written into the nature of me. And I think people have different reasons that they might get stuck because of sin, because we live in a fallen world. And it could be because of wounds from other relationships. It could be because of abuse from when you're a child. And it could be because of society. Like society as a group can make you not capable of marriage. But the good news is, and that's what I want to preach, or share with people. The good news is because of Christ and the Holy Spirit, he can heal us from those wounds and he can help us still get to marriage. And that's what he did for me. Like he helped me overcome the obstacles and the impediments that I had to attract and sustain a relationship that could get to marriage. And he can still do, like God, like in one of the scriptures, it says that the governments or the nations, depending what translation you look at, are a drop in the bucket to God. So I always analogize that over that society is a drop in the bucket to God. He can help you find a spouse and he can do that for you, but you have to cooperate with him to like work on your issues, your wounds, change your behaviors to help your part in it as well. And the part that you brought up, Bill, like we have a commitment with God and we need marriage. Like marriage, like you said, is a need, or I said marriage is a need, but it's a need because we don't want to be alone, but we also need that commitment with the vocation because it's also a sanctifying grace. Like we've all heard it say that our spouses help us get to heaven. Because like St. John Paul II talked about the school of love. Nothing sanctifies you more than marriage. And for people who forsake it for the kingdom, that's their school of love. Like that's their measure or mechanism of sanctification. So if you like just want to be single, like not that God can't bring other sanctification measures into your life, because he can, but you need that sanctifying, like that sandpaper that marriage brings into your life. But you also need the companionship. It's a gift. I like to say marriage is a mercy. So,
Yeah. Congratulations to you too. Now you've been married, was it 10 years, did you say?
yeah, we just had our 10-year wedding anniversary last month.
Wow, that's awesome. Yeah, you give a lot of hope to people. And we have about 10 more minutes left of the show. I wondered if you can share, like, somebody who might be listening and thinking exactly what you thought 10 years ago. Now, what can they do? Like, in other words, should the mindset be of someone who makes the same decision that you did, that God is calling them to marriage? So does that mean, do they sign up for Catholic Match, tell all their friends that, hey, I'm open to relationships? What do they do? Do they leave themselves open that way? Or do they just kind of wait for, quote, God to show someone, in other words, did they be proactive or just like reactive about this whole thing?
That's a really good question. You have to do both. Like, it's kind of like if we knew somebody who was unemployed, like we would never tell them like, you just stay home and trust that God's going to drop a job, on your lap, even though God's done that for me too. But you have to do both. So you have to pray and ask God to work providentially in your life. But then you also um, have to also look and see, like, maybe where you're contributing to your own singleness, and you definitely have to put yourself out there. And like, so there were things that, like, I was definitely afraid to do. Like, I was definitely afraid of putting my picture out on a profile. So I had to do that. And I hated rejection. And so I had decided that I was going to be one of those people who could go on a date with a man, and if I never heard from him again, it was okay. Like, I was going to get through it. And then I also went on blind dates. I asked people to set me up with people. I even had my mother have her coworkers set me up with people, like lunch dates, things like that. I mean, I I left like no stone unturned. And um it's even if you I wrote an article recently on my blog post called the 12 Dates Club that this other woman did. She just was like open to any date possible to get to 12 dates, just so you get practice dating. And I think that, like, I was really, I just recently, I was just really encouraged by her story, because her story was a little different than mine. And she married in her 40s too. And 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 it's painful. It's painful to be older and dating. It's extremely painful. But I think you have to start somewhere, and you just have to be determined that you're going to go out there. And I was like, I'm not going to go down without a fight. Like, I'm just not going to go down without a fight.
So you set your mind and your heart and your willingness to do God's will, right, at what you felt that God was calling you to marriage. So I think that's real perseverance is what it is.
Right. Right. Like when we know people who are unemployed, we tell them to go on their interviews. We were like, even if you don't get the job, it's still practice with an interview. So even if the date doesn't turn into anything, it's still practice. Like, we should, you know, like blind dates are very painful. Um, and I remember going on a blind date, and I went into the restroom and I was crying. I was going to call someone to come pick me up because it was such a nightmare of a blind date. Um, but then I actually met my husband on a blind date. So you never know how God's going to work. You just,
Right.
yeah, you just don't know.
I'm so glad that you found the man that God had in mind for you. And I think you give so much hope for people who are single for a long, long time. And, I'm the director for a foundation where we deal with a lot of people who are divorced and annulled. And, after they've been divorced for so many years, sometimes it is in somebody's heart that after that annulment has gone through and they do have a desire to try to find someone else, and following church teaching, right? Because they're not doing it while they're not annulled. They're doing it after this annulment. So I know you said your husband went through that. Can you talk a little bit about that too?
Sure. Well, my husband, I think I shared this with you previously, was not a Catholic when I met him. He was a non-denominational Christian. And so when I first met him, I was very open about, like, hey, I cannot, really go forward with anything with you, unless you get that previous marriage annulled. Because I was not going to go to hell over being married to somebody who I could not legally, in the eyes of God, marry. because I took the church marriage rules very seriously. And so after I met him, he went back to Texas, and because he was living in Texas at the time, and he went to his local Catholic church and talked to the priest about annulments so he could figure out about them.
Yeah, that's
Which
great.
I thought was really funny. I thought it would scare him off, but it didn't. And that's where I feel like people have to trust God, that if you do what God asks you to do, God will make a way. I think God is looking for people to have faith, that God wants people to have faith in him. And so, we looked into the annulment process, and it turned out that my husband's first wife was a Catholic, but she had left the Catholic Church. And so they were not married in the appropriate ecclesiastical form. And so we were able to get an annulment in 2 weeks.
Oh, wow, that's quick.
Yeah, it was really a miracle. And I knew nothing about the annulment. And that made me a little scared of him too. But once I understood, and the priest explained it to us and everything, it was, God just really worked a miracle. So.
Wow. Well, you have an amazing ministry. And I want to mention your website again for people to reach out to you. It's passionofhope.com. So tell us about your, now I'm using the word services, but I know that they're not necessarily like paid services, right? But
No.
Tell us about I should call it a ministry, right? I mean, this ministry. Tell us about what you offer to the people listening so they can connect with you.
Sure. Well, on my website, I have a blog there where people can read like articles where I try to combine both like, scripture and theology. So, because I feel like once you understand how God sees it, that's very helpful. But then I also try to do some practical, because I think people need both practical and the spiritual to combat this issue. But I also have a free ebook that people can download called Prolonged Singleness, the ABC Guide to Breaking Free. And it's got journal prompts and, kind of just a place for people to jumpstart working through this issue, to look at their own mindsets, how they view God, scriptures and catechism quotes that they can like look up themselves and really start bringing the issue to God. Because the best place to start is really just admitting to God that you want to get married and inviting God to help you start working through the issues that you may be struggling with. Because it's really, I kind of want to excite people to be like, I want to get married, and because I can't really get you married, but I can help you seek God to help you get married.
And
encourage
what a
you to
beautiful
do
mission that you have. And I think it's wonderful and beautiful that you're doing this. It is not like a quote paid service. I mean, this is something that you're doing as a ministry. Now, are you a nonprofit 501c3 as well?
No.
Okay.
No. Mm-mm. And I also write for Catholic Match. So there's links.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there are links there to my Catholic Match articles, so people can see that as well.
Yeah, that's so good. That's so good. Any final words before we end? First, I want to thank you so much for being a guest, because I think your work is really fascinating. And I think that your ministry is unique. And I think that I think that young people need to hear this message too. I don't think it's just for the older people who can't find a spouse or feel called to marriage, but didn't find that person yet. Younger people need to hear this message too.
Yeah, the younger they marry, they won't end up like I did. So so it's, and I just want to thank you for having me on. Like, this was really an honor to be on your podcast. So thank you both for having me as a guest. And I just want to encourage people to, believe that God wants them to be married, and to, that it's, marriage is a gift.
Thank you so much. God bless you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. You too.
Yeah, folks, thank you so much for listening as well. And know that we will have all of the links and whatnot right in our show notes. But until next time, from all of us here at Patchwork Heart Ministry, I'm Bill Snyder. Keep beating to your Catholic hearts and sowing hope into broken hearts. Thanks for listening to this episode of Sowing Hope on Patchwork Heart Radio. For more information about this podcast and our ministries, visit our websites, patchworkheart.org and andesantis.com. You can also follow and interact with us on Twitter at PWH Ministry or Andy Santis 2.